It's time to tell you a new story, another crime that was brilliantly solved. On August 26, 2015, in South Australia, near the city of Mannum, 20-year-old Jody Meyers and her fiancé, 29-year-old Neil Archer, celebrated the birthday of Jody's stepfather. The party was in full swing, but the couple did not share the general fun. The fact is that Neil did not want to attend the celebration and was sitting in the car. Jody, who could have been chatting by the fireplace with her loved ones and enjoying the holiday, had to run to the car every now and then and beg her boyfriend to come into the house. Some of the guests even brought food to Neil, in the hope that it would cheer him up and he would join the others. But the young man was adamant. Around 8:30 p.m., the couple left the party, and their argument continued at home. It ended with Jody telling Neil about the breakup. The next day, Lucy, Jody's mother, received a text message from her daughter, who wrote that she would not come to her tonight, since she broke up with Neil yesterday and changed her phone number. Later, she will tell her parents where she is, and now she has moved to another area and quit her job. When everything falls into place, she will definitely tell you in detail about what happened. The daughter also wrote that she was safe, her comrades were with her, and she loved her loved ones madly. The text was rather clumsy. There were no punctuation marks in it. Lucy also found several spelling mistakes, which made her alarmed. According to her mother, Jody had no problems with spelling and grammar, and even if she made a mistake, she immediately corrected it. For example, sent the text again. In this case, she didn't. Of course, it was possible to explain such an act by the fact that Jody was in a hurry or was in a stressful state because she had left her boyfriend the night before. On top of that, she had to change her phone number, which she reported by SMS. Unsurprisingly, neither Lucy nor Jody's sisters believed that she had sent the message herself. Sister Tanya noted that the style of the text differs from Jody's style of presentation of thoughts. Besides, Jody would never have left her 2-year-old son Elijah, whom she gave birth to from Neil. The relatives were absolutely sure of this. The boy was the meaning of the young mother's life. She loved him very much, and according to friends and relatives, would have taken the child with her. The latter fact prompted the family to report Jody missing to the police. The household did not want to believe that something terrible could happen, but they were afraid to miss the time. Jody's family feared that the police would not take it seriously. After all, it often happens that statements are simply ignored, especially when it comes to the disappearance of young girls who quarreled with the grooms. Often offended girls voluntarily leave the house alone, at a distance to comprehend what happened and throw out emotions. However, the police paid great attention to the statement of Jody's family. They were alarmed that a young mother abandoned her child, and they could not dismiss such a strange case. Concerned detectives immediately began searching. The general excitement intensified when it became clear that someone had used Jody's bank card. An amount of $250 was withdrawn from an ATM in the city center. Either Jody is not far away and simply does not want to return, or an unknown person is trying to arrange everything in this way. Soon, Jody's disappearance was officially announced, and an investigation began. This story thundered throughout South Australia. First of all, the staff of the investigative department interrogated everyone from the close circle of the missing: the groom, 3 sisters, brother, friends, but no one could provide any valuable information about the whereabouts of Jody. Except, of course, her fiancé Neil, because he was the last person to see Jody. Neil told police that he and Jody continued to argue on the way home after the party. According to him, during the trip, his girlfriend threw her ring out of the window in anger. Later, the police tried to find the jewelry, and Neil also said that the last time he saw Jody, she was getting into a red Nissan X-Trail car with a man and a woman he didn't know. The police released this information, hiding the fact that Neil Archer was the only person of interest to them, and stating that at this stage, he is just a useful witness for the investigation. In fact, the detectives had no other suspects. Extensive searches were conducted in the surrounding area, including the local bushland where Jody was last seen. The police examined the house of Neil and Jody as well as the Mary River, but no trace of the young mother was found. The ring that Jody allegedly threw out of the car window could not be found either, despite the fact that Neil showed the alleged location. The case began to gain momentum. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances periodically appeared in the media, telling about the situation and making various statements. One of the speakers was Neil's mother, 55-year-old Margaret Archer. Margaret said that everyone is hoping for Jody's return, since her son needs a mother. Then the woman turned to Jody, asking her to show up soon or contact someone and let them know that she was all right. Neil, of course, also made several statements for reporters, who more than once waited for him at home or saw him playing with his son. The guy calmly reacted to the increased attention, saying only that it was a little annoying for him, but he was happy to help the authorities in the investigation. But let's go back to the conversation about the fact that Jody's bank card was used the day after her disappearance, because this is a really important moment in this story. The police requested video recordings from surveillance cameras installed above the central ATM and were shocked by what they saw. The money wasn't being withdrawn by Jody or even Neil, as was supposed. It was a woman wearing a hoodie with a hood thrown over her head. No doubt she wanted to hide her identity. It didn't take the detectives long to figure out who this mysterious woman was. It turned out to be Neil's mother, Margaret. Withdrawing cash certainly didn't make her a murderer, but the thief was arrested for theft. It was not known exactly under what pretext Margaret took possession of Jody's bank card and then used it after Jody disappeared. It is possible that Margaret needed money and simply stole the card or asked for it from Jody because they were close acquaintances. Be that as it may, Neil's mother vehemently denied any involvement in Jody's disappearance, both to the police and publicly. After interrogations and explanations, Margaret was released on bail, but this strange incident prompted investigators to carefully examine her actions at the time when Jody disappeared. Some interesting things have surfaced. So, detectives found 2 receipts for purchases from 2 different hardware stores. Margaret bought 10 bags of cement from one hardware store and 10 bags from another store, and also bought a wheelbarrow. The purchases were quite unusual and amazed with their volumes. The investigators wanted to confirm that it was Margaret who committed them. They went to the hardware store where Neil's mother had visited 3 days after Jody disappeared. After viewing the CCTV footage, they saw that Margaret had indeed purchased a huge amount of cement, but why did she need so much? Of course, buying construction material is not a crime, but detectives somehow needed to get an explanation, especially since the purchase of this product was paid exactly the amount that Margaret withdrew from the ATM. The police decided to talk to Margaret's husband, Lawrence. According to the latter, he was in Tasmania on the day Jody disappeared. When he returned home, his son said that he had a gift for him in honor of Father's Day. Neil rarely showed generosity, so Lawrence became curious. The son asked his father to go out into the yard, and together they went to the shed, inside of which lay a fresh concrete slab just laid by Neil. Lawrence was surprised by the surprise, as he considered his son somewhat lazy and selfish. It was impossible not to note that Neil had done a laborious job of filling the ground with cement. The father thanked his son for the gift, and immediately distracted, began to talk about his trip to Tasmania. After hearing this story, the detectives realized that the puzzle was forming by itself, and Neil was no longer an ordinary witness, but suspect number 1. In the case of Jody's disappearance, there was another person who was tormented by remorse because he knew something and could not tell anyone so as not to expose his family. Neil's brother, Aaron, did not want to perform certain tasks at the request of his family. I'll tell you what the tasks are later. He had learned something terrible. My brother tried to convince Neil to turn himself into the police. When Neil flatly refused, Aaron had no choice but to come to the station and tell everything. On September 24, 2015, at 1 o'clock in the morning, Neil Archer agreed to meet with officers at an agreed place after his brother's visit to the police station. Neil was soon taken into custody, arrested and formally charged with the murder of his fiancé, Jody Meyers. A day later, investigators began searching Lawrence and Margaret's home in Manham, about an hour-and-a-half drive from Adelaide. On the same day, forensic scientists found Jody's body buried in a shallow grave. The hole was dug under a fresh concrete slab inside the barn, the very slab that had become a gift for Lawrence on Father's Day. Experts have confirmed that the body belongs to Jody Meyers. At that time, a month had already passed since her disappearance. The investigators made a statement saying that most likely a violent murder had occurred. After that, Jody's son-in-law came out publicly and said that loved ones hoped for Jody's safe return until the bad news came. Her death will leave an indelible void in their hearts, but the good memories of a loving mother, daughter, and sister who could not be blamed for anything will remain with them forever. All that relatives have from now on are memories. A few months later, Neil's mother, Margaret, the same one who stole $250 from Jody's card and bought a pile of cement, was remanded in custody awaiting trial on charges of involvement in Jody's murder. She was still trying her best to prove her innocence. It is assumed that Neil's father, Lawrence, knew nothing about what had happened. And now I will briefly tell you what really happened on that terrible night and fill in some gaps in this story. When Jody and Neil returned home after the party, they had a serious fight. Neil believed that the bride's parents did not like him, and was sure that they wanted to separate the couple. In a fit of rage, the young man lost control of himself and began to strangle Jody with a cord from his hoodie until she stopped breathing. Later, it was reported that Neil, while in the cell and communicating with other prisoners, said that his mother was really present in the house during the quarrel and held Jody. However, it was not possible to prove this. The next day, Neil asked his mother to help him hide the traces of the crime, and Margaret coldly agreed to destroy the evidence pointing to the murder of the one who gave birth to her grandson. Just thinking about it makes my body shiver. Margaret bought cement by withdrawing money from an ATM and replenished Jody's phone with $10 to send a clumsy message to Lucy, the mother of the deceased. As already mentioned, the message aroused suspicion because it looked a little strange and did not look like the one that Jody could write. In fact, it turned out that Neil forced his mother to do all the dirty work for him. It is also worth noting that Margaret herself has been a victim of domestic violence in the past. How strange and wild that, having been in such a situation, she still agreed to hide the traces of this heartbreaking crime. No matter how much the mother loves her son, it is hard to believe that she will find an excuse to help him in such a terrible situation. But at the same time, there are parents who claim that they would do anything for their children. Margaret must have been one of the latter, and it's really terrible. But it's even scarier to realize that Jody's little son partially witnessed what happened. Elijah sat in the car while Margaret visited hardware stores and paid for purchases. It also turned out that the child was in Margaret's house when his mother's body was transported there by Neil and buried in the barn. The boy was with his grandmother and probably asked more than once about where his mother was and why she didn't come. The information that appeared as the case was disclosed caused a huge shock to the public. The police recorded phone conversations between Margaret and Neil where they discussed the issue of covering up the crime. They had no way to solve the problem, and both felt very guilty. In their conversations, they also mentioned Neil's brother, Aaron. Margaret tried to involve her second son in what was happening, and then his half-sister. She made them both burn their clothes and destroy evidence such as cement bags, but Aaron deftly refused to comply with the requirements and, in the end, turned to the police. Now, as time has passed, we can admit how stupid Neil and Margaret were. They made mistakes literally at every step, and most likely seriously believed that they would get away with the crime. In 2016, Neil Archer pleaded guilty to the murder of Jody Meyers, sparing her friends and family a harrowing trial. In 2017, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of parole after 22 years. This is a pretty good result by Australian standards, and the fact that the killer pleaded guilty is also pleasing. In South Australia, it is possible to achieve a reduction in the sentence for a guilty plea by about 30%. But the judge felt that Neil did not deserve it. It is worth noting that Jody's friends and relatives were pleased with this verdict. As for Neil's mother, Margaret Archer, she dragged her time to the last and did not admit what she had done. But in the end, the criminal still changed her statement and admitted guilt. Her lawyer said that in general, Margaret led an impeccable life and sincerely cared about her large family. However, considering that she patiently waited until the last moment, not wanting to confess to the crime, we can draw a simple conclusion. Margaret does not repent of her act at all. In 2018, she was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for assisting a criminal, and in June 2022 she was released. But she was almost immediately transferred to the border, from where she was deported to her homeland in the UK. As far as we know, she is still free and lives there. As for little Elijah, he is in the care of his grandmother Lucy. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you. See you soon.